They were the superstars of their age. The most famous, most adored, most highly paid performers in all of Europe, mobbed by screaming fans, showered with jewels and gold, courted by kings and emperors, their names known in every great city, their voices considered the most beautiful sounds a human being could produce. They were the rock stars of the 18th century, the idols of the opera, capable of feats of vocal brilliance that no ordinary singer could match, with voices of supernatural power, range, and beauty that left audiences weeping, fainting, and crying out in ecstasy. But behind their glittering fame lay a dark and terrible secret. For these extraordinary voices had been created through a brutal act performed on them as children, a surgery that robbed them of part of themselves forever in order to preserve for a lifetime the pure, high voice of a boy in the powerful body of a man. They were the Castrati, and their story is one of the strangest, most glamorous, and most disturbing in the entire history of music, a tale of dazzling artistic triumph built upon an act of irreversible cruelty. Today, we are going to explore their secret world, how they were made, how they lived, the incredible heights of fame and fortune they reached, and the dark price they paid for their immortal voices. Using advanced AI trained on the history of opera and music, the accounts of the famous singers and those who heard them, and the historical and cultural record of this extraordinary phenomenon, we have reconstructed the secret world of the Castrati. To understand it, you must first understand a strange collision between music, religion, and the customs of the age that created the demand for these singers in the first place. The phenomenon arose from a peculiar set of circumstances in the musical and religious world of the time. Music, especially the glorious sacred music of the church and the spectacular new art form of opera, prized the high, pure, powerful voice. But there was a problem. In certain religious contexts of the era, women were not permitted to sing, and the high voices in church music and in some theatrical settings had to be supplied by others, by boys whose voices were pure, but who lost those voices as they grew up, and whose abilities were limited by their youth, or by men singing in a strained high technique that could not match the power desired. And so, a terrible solution emerged. It was discovered that if a boy with a beautiful voice underwent a certain surgery before his voice broke, before the changes of growing up deepened it, his voice would never break at all. He would keep the high, pure vocal range of a boy. But crucially, his body would still grow into that of a man, large, with a powerful chest and great lung capacity. The result was a voice unlike any other in nature, the high, pure pitch and range of a child or a woman, combined with the power, the lung capacity, the strength, and the years of training and skill of an adult man. It was a voice of extraordinary, almost supernatural quality, powerful yet pure, able to sustain notes of incredible length, to execute dazzling runs and ornaments, to fill a great theatre with a sound of unearthly beauty, and so, to produce these voices, the brutal practice spread. The making of a castrato was an act of irreversible cruelty performed on a child, and it must be understood plainly. The surgery was carried out on young boys, before puberty, while their voices were still high. It was a decision made for them, not by them, by their families and others, and the boys themselves had no say in a procedure that would shape, and in many ways diminish, the entire rest of their lives. Many of the boys came from poor families, and the terrible truth is that desperate poverty was often a driving force. A poor family with a son who possessed a beautiful voice might see, in this brutal procedure, a chance to lift the child, and perhaps the whole family, out of poverty, gambling the boy's body and future on the small chance that he might become a famous and wealthy singer. For most of the boys who underwent the surgery, that dream never came true. Only a small number ever achieved real fame and fortune. The many others, those who did not have the talent, the luck, or the training to become stars, were left having paid the terrible price of the surgery for nothing, condemned to lives marked by the irreversible consequences of what had been done to them as children, often in obscurity and difficulty. The glittering fame of the few famous castrati rested upon the suffering of the many who were sacrificed in the hope of producing them. It was, by any modern understanding, a profound violation, an act of mutilation inflicted on children who could not consent, and we should never let the glamour of the result obscure the cruelty of its making. But for the few who succeeded, The rewards were dazzling beyond imagination, and they became the greatest celebrities of their age. The most successful castrati were trained for years in rigorous musical schools, developing their extraordinary voices and their dazzling technical skills to the highest possible degree. And when they emerged onto the great stages of Europe, they became superstars of a kind the world had rarely seen. They were the leading singers of the opera, the form that was the popular entertainment and the high art of the age, and they commanded the leading heroic roles. Audiences went wild for them. People wept, screamed, swooned, and cried out in adoration at their performances. Their feats of vocal skill, their ability to hold a single note for an astonishing length, to leap across vast ranges, to ornament a melody with breathtaking runs and trills, drove audiences into frenzies of enthusiasm. They were paid enormous sums, fortunes that made them wealthy beyond the dreams of ordinary people. They were celebrated, feted, and pursued across Europe, performing for kings, queens, and emperors, who competed to attract them to their courts and showered them with gifts, jewels, titles, and honors. The greatest of them achieved a level of international fame and adulation comparable to the biggest stars of any age, their names known and revered across the entire continent, their voices regarded as among the wonders of the world. From the brutal surgery and the years of grueling training, a small number rose to a pinnacle of glamour, wealth, and fame that few performers in history have ever matched. Their lives, at the height of their fame, were lives of extraordinary glamour, luxury, and adoration. The star castrati lived like the celebrities they were, wealthy, famous, courted by the highest in the land, traveling from city to city and court to perform, accumulating fortunes, fine clothes, jewels, and luxuries. They were objects of intense fascination and adoration, with devoted fans, admirers, and followers. They mingled with royalty and aristocracy as honored stars, their company sought after, their talents celebrated, their fame opening every door. Some became powerful and influential figures, wealthy enough to live in grand style, famous enough to be received everywhere, their artistry placing them at the very summit of the cultural life of Europe. And yet, woven through all this glamour and success, there ran always the shadow of what they were and what had been done to them. Their fame was inseparable from their condition. They were celebrated, but they were also, in some eyes, objects of curiosity, pity, or even mockery, marked forever as different, set apart from ordinary humanity by the irreversible thing that had made them what they were. They could not marry and have families in the ordinary way. They occupied a strange, ambiguous place in their society, adored and yet apart, powerful and yet diminished, at the height of fame and yet carrying, always, a private wound that all their wealth and glory could never heal. And the world they ruled would eventually turn against them and pass away. The age of the castrati lasted for a long time, generations in which these singers dominated the opera and the sacred music of Europe and stood among its greatest stars. But tastes changed, and so did morals. Over time, the fashion in opera shifted. The kinds of music and voices that audiences craved began to change, and the dominance of the castrati on the stage gradually declined. And, more importantly, the moral conscience of the world slowly turned against the brutal practice that had created them. The act of subjecting children to such a surgery for the sake of art and fame came increasingly to be seen for what it was: a cruelty, a barbarism, no longer acceptable in a changing world. The practice was, over time, condemned, restricted, and finally prohibited, and the making of new castrati came to an end. The last of them lived on into more modern times, the final survivors of a vanished art and a vanished cruelty, and one of the very last was even recorded late in life, so that, faintly and imperfectly, across the crackle of an early recording, we can still catch a ghostly echo of the kind of voice that once drove the audiences of Europe into ecstasies, the last trace of a sound that has now vanished from the world forever. The age of the castrati was over, and the strange, glamorous, terrible phenomenon passed into history. That was the secret world of the castrati, one of the strangest and most disturbing stories in the history of music. The superstar singers of the 18th century, the idols of the opera, mobbed by adoring fans, showered with gold and jewels, courted by kings, possessed of voices of such supernatural power, purity, and beauty that audiences wept and swooned to hear them, the greatest celebrities of their age. And the dark secret behind that glamour, that these extraordinary voices were created by a brutal surgery inflicted on young boys, before they were old enough to consent, often driven by the poverty of their families, a violation that marked them irreversibly for life, that sacrificed the many obscure failures for the few glittering stars, and that condemned even the most famous to a strange, set-apart existence, adored and diminished at the same time. Their story is a profound and troubling one, a reminder that great art and great cruelty have sometimes been terribly intertwined, that the most beautiful sounds in the world were, in this case, purchased at a price no one had any right to make those children pay. The age of the castrati has long passed, ended at last by changing tastes and an awakening moral conscience. Their glittering world of fame and adoration is gone, their voices fallen silent forever, save for one ghostly, crackling echo on an ancient recording. And they remain, the castrati, among the most fascinating and the most tragic figures in all the history of art, the manufactured superstars whose immortal voices dazzled all of Europe, and whose glory was built upon a wound that could never be healed.